You know, in these life-or-death professions, what's the most dangerous threat? It's not always some big, dramatic mistake. Sometimes, it's something way quieter. We're diving into Atul Gawande's The Checklist Manifesto to get a look at this hidden danger and the surprisingly simple tool that can actually stop.
So, when you think about a team of experts failing, what comes to mind? Probably clashing egos, right? Big arguments? But what if the real problem isn't the noise? What if it's the silence?
And this quote, man, it just nails it. This is what Gawande calls silent disengagement. It's that moment when you've got all these highly skilled people, but they're so focused on their one little piece of the puzzle that dangerous gaps open up between them. Everyone just assumes someone else is handling the big picture.
What happens is you get this culture where everyone is a master of their own craft, but nobody really sees it as their job to make sure the whole group succeeds. It's like every gear is spinning perfectly, but no one is actually watching the whole machine to make sure it works together. Okay, so that's the problem. But what does it look like when everything goes right? Well, Gawande shares this incredible story from his own experience, a moment where, completely against the odds, it all just worked. The situation was about as dire as it gets. I mean, this guy had just had heart surgery a week earlier, and now he's facing another operation with maybe a 50% chance of survival. The stakes just couldn't have been higher. And here's the kicker. The team had never even met. Gawande points out that in a big hospital with staff rotating all the time, teamwork is basically a roll of the dice. You're working with total strangers and just hoping everyone's on the same page. But here's what happened. Even when they found out the damage was way worse than they thought, the team just adapted flawlessly. Everyone was thinking ahead, not just for their own job, but for the entire team, for the patient. They weren't just a group of individuals, they were working like a single unit. And the result? The patient survived. He walked out of the hospital just a few days later. It was this amazing outcome that Gawande says had less to do with his own skill and everything to do with this mysterious, perfect chemistry the team had. At the time, he just figured, wow, we got lucky. But what if it wasn't just luck? This is where the whole idea of a checklist comes in, not just as a way to remember stuff, but as a tool that's actually designed to create that kind of perfect symphonic teamwork on purpose. You see, researchers found this fascinating thing called the activation phenomenon. It turns out that doing something as simple as having everyone on the team introduce themselves by name does more than just break the ice. It actually flips a switch in your brain. It makes you feel like an active participant, not just a passive observer, which makes you way more likely to speak up if you see something wrong later. And the results? Well, they speak for themselves. Look at this study from Johns Hopkins. They started using a checklist that included these simple communication steps. The number of staff who felt they functioned as a well-coordinated team shot up from 68% to an incredible 92%. It wasn't just about how people felt either. At Kaiser Hospitals, this number, 7%, is the new annual turnover rate for operating room nurses. It had been 23%. It plummeted after they brought in a checklist. People weren't just working better, they were happier and more invested in their jobs.
I mean, just let that sink in for a second. In more than half of all cases, this simple piece of paper caught a significant problem. In one case, it helped the team realize the patient couldn't speak and had to use hand signals. That's a pretty critical detail to know when you're monitoring their anesthetic.
So you can imagine, with all this data piling up, Gawande was fired up. The evidence was just so compelling. He goes back to his own hospital, really excited to try out the new World Health Organization checklist. He walks into his operating room ready to change the world and presents this idea to his team. But the reaction was kind of, sure, whatever you say, doc. And that skeptical vibe was just the first sign of trouble. His first try was a total flop, a complete disaster. The whole point was to have this collaborative verbal discussion to catch errors, but instead the nurse just ended up silently ticking off boxes on her own. The checklist itself was the problem. It was confusing, and it never actually said, hey, everyone do this together. So that powerful tool that seems so revolutionary in all those studies, in reality, it just felt clumsy and annoying, like one more piece of paperwork. The great idea failed on its very first day, and the team just dropped it. Now, a failure that big could have been the end of it. But for Gawande, this humbling moment was actually a new beginning. It made him realize he'd been asking the wrong questions all along. He had a breakthrough. He realized the problem wasn't the idea of a checklist, it was the design.
A surgical OR, where every single second counts, needs a very different kind of checklist than, say, a construction site. It had to be built for both incredible complexity and intense time pressure.
So if your own field doesn't have the answer, where do you look? Well, he turned to a totally different world, another high-stakes field, aviation. He decided to find out what pilots, who have decades of experience with this stuff, could teach surgeons about making checklists that actually work when lives are on the line.